All right, so we're going to talk about specifically a couple of different types of ID, and we'll focus on kind of our assignment as it relates to photo ID. And, again, one of the reasons that I bring some of this information in there is if you're going to write about it, you should at least understand why or what the process basically is when it comes to identification, because you are going to have to do some writing about this. So, a lot of times, the first kind of thing is what we call a field show up ID. And these are interesting because they're typically after the fact. And you're going to have to write about these, and we'll get into them in a little bit more detail, even though it doesn't take that long to go through this kind of lecture, though. But if a suspect's apprehended while committing a crime, you can have a witness identify the person, right? Hey, and you can get a statement. That's pretty easy. And the same is generally too if the suspect is caught at or near the crime scene. We don't always, it's not like TV, we don't always catch the suspects at the place where they commit the crime. They've left the crime, they're fleeing the scene, they're in a car, they're running, on a bike, on a motorcycle, whatever, but you don't always get there in time to catch them there, right? So we have something called a field show up or a field identification. And so this is where you're detaining somebody after the crime has occurred close to the scene, but not like at the scene. All right. And we'll talk about why that's important. And the critical element for a field show up, all right, or this field ID, and they call it field show up because it's in the field, it's out in the field, it's not like right there, and that kind of makes sense, right? The critical element is time. So for a field ID to be good, valid, the ID really needs to occur pretty soon after the crime was committed. Usually, they'll stretch it a little bit, but 15 to 20, maybe 30 minutes. For an in-field ID, and there's a case law that established that. You don't need to know the case law, but in a field ID, people aren't, they talk about the 20 minutes, the 15 minutes, 20 minutes, etc. But they're not entitled to an attorney, okay, or counsel in the field on a field ID. All right, so imagine if you had to write this, and I bring this up only because, let's say you get a call and you respond to the local liquor store, and the suspect was seen running southbound with a bag full of money or booze or whatever, a beer run. They stole some beer, okay? And you're checking the area and you see somebody running that matches the description, and you stop them because you believe they're involved in the crime. Okay, that's when you're going to do what they call this infield. You're going to detain the person there. Somebody else is going to bring the witness or the victim to you, not all the way up to you, but within a distance to where that person can see the possible suspect, and they're going to identify them. Either, yes, that's the person that took it, or no, it's not. That's called an ID, a field ID. And people aren't entitled to an attorney at a field ID. But I want you to think about how you would write that. And a field ID kind of looks like this, where the one officer or two officers would detain somebody, waiting for another officer to bring the victim or the witness by to make an identification, which is why they call it a field ID, okay? And there's other ways to develop a suspect. If the suspect's not at the scene and not apprehended, you're going to have to develop one through other means, right? We've kind of talked a little bit about that, whether it's victims or witnesses. So this kind of plays into why it's important for you to get a good victim statement or a witness statement. Physical evidence, what was left at the scene, any type of profiling, police files, databases, all of these things are available to you, but you're going to have to document how you did it. It could be informants, news media, social media, but just know that developing suspect information, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but start thinking about how you would write it, Okay. Now, at other times, the victim or witness, they provide the required information, and your task is to kind of corroborate the ID through, you know, other evidence, right? Linking evidence, what they call associative evidence, like fingerprints, shoe prints, etc. And again, those are things that you're going to have to write about. Developing a suspect is much easier if the victim or witness can describe and identify the suspect. Rather than simply asking a witness to describe a suspect. Remember, ask questions. So if you're, putting out information or things, you're getting information about your suspect, go through the whole list, right? The who, what, where, why, how, and when. Get all those questions answered. It's really important. Remember, witnesses may not have seen the actual crime, but they might have a partial license plate. Everybody carries a cell phone nowadays. Everybody. So you may want to ask them if they took a picture or took a video. You'd be surprised how many people video crimes that are happening or something like that. So these are just ideas, okay? Again, when you're talking about cameras, video, and things like that, here's an officer-involved shooting. This is a young lady. This was caught on a camera outside of a store where she's an off-duty officer, and this guy right here, it's hard to see the gun in his hand, but he tried to rob her at gunpoint, and she actually ended up shooting him. But you've got the camera. So again, all of these things are out there. Some reasons why witness ID is not always perfect, though. Think about things like visibility. Think about things like it happened so fast. Okay. Distance can always be an issue, right? Your faulty memory. Think about last week. What did you eat last Friday for dinner, if you can remember? Maybe some of you can. Maybe some of you can't. We tend to forget things as more, as time goes on, we kind of start to lose our memory a little bit. So all of these are issues. Booking photos. If the victim or witness doesn't know the suspect, but they saw him or her clearly, you can identify them. And that's your assignment this week, is going to be a photo ID, okay? But we also have booking photos of individuals. So mugshots, can be a little time consuming, but you have photos of criminals that have already been photographed and booked. So you could, if it's a specific MO, you could show them that. We'll talk about composite drawings later on, but if a witness can provide adequate information, you could actually do a sketch. Maybe you couldn't, but your organization might have a crime scene tech or someone that can use, Identikit or something like that, which is what this is. It's a computerized system that basically will allow you to put together a composite sketch of someone. So, and the big brand out there right now for departments is what they call Identikit. Here's a sketch that one of my classes did of me based on a description. Actually, not too bad. I kind of figure I think they ripped me off on the hairline. But here's some other issues. When you talk about developing suspects, again, this is the teardrop rapist. And while this is, not a criminology class, something interesting, these are the different assaults. Now, they all took place in kind of a very, kind of localized area, right? One thing interesting to note is they're all kind of around freeways. So, possibly for quick getaway, or maybe he lives here somewhere in there. Here's another interesting thing. These are the number of assaults per year. 1995, 96, you can see he was super busy here. Super busy in 2000. A year went by, then another one, and then this big gap. What do you guys think happened here? Did this serial rapist just decide not to do it anymore?
He could have left, or he could have been going through something that lowered his sex drive.
Or one other thing.
Could have been in jail.
Could have been in jail. Okay, could have done a stint in jail for something else like burglary or drugs or whatever. So these are all just kind of things to consider. And I talked about composites. These are interesting. These are all composite drawings of the same suspect. Now, a little bit over time, but here's 2 in 02. I don't know about you. Do these look the same to you? So, I mean, it's not always great. Here's a couple in 01. I mean, I'm still not feeling it here. They just, here's a couple others in 01. Okay, so this is a little better. You look at kind of these 3, little heavier in the face here, but okay. Kind of the mustache. At least you've got something kind of consistent here. Kind of with the nose a little bit. But I don't know. But I mean, some of these here are just, kind of way off. So IDs aren't always perfect. Consider, though, and we'll talk more about this, MO, which is the pattern of how somebody commits a crime. Remember, it's not the reason why. Why could be revenge, drugs, money, whatever. But the MO is how they do it. And so you can solve a lot of crimes and ID people through MO. An example, just to bring up quickly, would be this guy here. He committed a series of burglaries in the Inland Empire. So that'd be San Bernardino County kind of area. And he had a very unique issue. His issue is that he would always break into apartments or homes of single females. Okay, and they were all single, at least not married, okay? He never forced entry. It was always through an open door or an open window. So you can see the MO starting to shape up, right? And he never assaulted a female. What he would do is he would sneak in the middle of the night, and he would basically tickle the woman's foot. Yeah, I know, it's like weird. It kind of gives me goosebumps just like talking about it. This guy was like weird. Just enough to where she would wake up kind of out of her sleep a little bit. You're kind of in that foggy daze, you're not quite awake, but you're not quite asleep. Enough to maybe see the outline of him, and then he would leave. And he would take a trophy like underwear, a bra, or something like that. Not off the victim, but from a drawer or something like that, or the floor or whatever. So he never harmed anyone, but that was that's an MO, if that makes sense. He would do the same thing every single time. So MOs are important, especially if you have to write about an MO. Okay? So these are all just interesting things to kind of think about without talking about profiling. Geographic profiling. This is the Colonel Russell Williams case. He was a Canadian Air Force colonel, turned out to be rapist, murderer, and burglar, etc. And you can see, his MO was everything kind of in the neighborhood where he actually lived. So kind of an interesting case on this guy. All right, and we talked a little bit about the teardrop rapist. Another thing you can use is to figure out, as they call it, hotspot policing. And again, these are just ideas for you to think of before we just jump right into our photo lineup. Hotspot policing is basically, where they start to, you can see the red areas here. These are several reports. So you can see a lot of activity happening here as compared to out here. So it's another way to kind of pin map or track reports. All right, so now we're going to kind of get into some things that are probably more familiar to some of you. When we talk about developing suspects, and we're going to hit the ID in just a second. We have these things called field interview cards. These are really important, and we get a lot of good information. So if you can't arrest somebody and you don't have enough to take them into custody, you can always complete one of these field ID cards. And these are all the data is put into a computer. So if you have another crime, you can run, let's say the person was driving a purple pickup truck. If anybody on a field ID card ever had a purple pickup truck, that would pop, and you'd be able to get some possible suspects that at least own that vehicle. Same with tattoos, different clothing, etc. So field ID cards are really good. All right, so here's the big three, kind of. All right. And the big three are, we won't talk a lot about booking photos, but the big three types of IDs are field show up, and you'll have to write about this, not in this case, but at some point. And we have photo lineup. That's your assignment that you're going to be doing this week. And then you have a lineup. Okay, so let me talk just briefly about these. So we know the field show up. I kind of covered that right away, right? This is where someone is detained, right outside of the crime scene, or maybe a little ways away within a 15 to a 30-minute, 20-minute time period, etc. You believe they're involved in the crime. You're going to detain them, and basically the witness or the victim is going to be brought to you, and they're going to make an ID or not make an ID. So again, this is where the suspect is brought to is shown to a witness, usually right after the crime occurs or within that short period of time. Officers usually bring the victim or the witness to the suspect. We don't do it the other way unless we have to. And the officers will still read the victim an admonishment. It looks like this. And you'll have a similar one when you do a photo ID. And the admonishment basically says, hey, you're going to be shown an individual or group of people, okay? And just because the officer is showing you this person, it shouldn't influence your judgment, okay? The person who committed the crime may or may not be the person that you're looking at. And study the subject, carefully, and you're not obligated to identify this person. We do this because we don't want to put pressure on a witness or a victim to make a false ID. And it could be subjective, right? Because the officers have this person detained, maybe even handcuffed, standing there. And so you might just think, well, it must be him. He's handcuffed and he's standing there. So we try to make it as objective as possible. So we read this admonishment, okay? And we even put here location of where you're going to view the person, how far away you were when we did the ID, were there any lighting issues, and then any comments, victim's comments. Yep, that's him. He's the one that took the beer, or whatever it is. Okay? And we do that to kind of protect ourselves and the integrity of the process. So that's an infield ID. The one that you're going to do is this. It's a photo lineup. Okay? And we call it a 6-pack for short, basically because there's 6 photos. Now that doesn't mean there's not another department out there that might use 8 photos. But typically the kind of norm is 6. Thus the reason that they call it a 6-pack. And when you make a 6-pack or you do this, you try to get photos of individuals that look similar. They're not going to look identical. They can't. Not everybody looks identical. All right. But you want to come close. In the olden days, we did this with Polaroid photographs, if everybody knows what those are. Hopefully you do, but it's the old camera where you click the button and the photo comes out. Now with digital photography, we can store a lot more photos of arrestees and things like that. But you basically number them. And this right here, for a lot of agencies, is a card. It used to be kind of like a picture frame with squares in it, and you would put the thing behind it. Now with, because we have digital photography and things, we can just print out a 6-pack. We can add the photos in there, print it out, and we can show it to the individual. So this is what a photo lineup looks like. All right. And we can get the photos from different places, whether it's booking photos, arrest booking photos, driver's license photos, surveillance photos. It doesn't matter where, but we can get the photos. But we just need to, again, they need to be somewhat similar. Okay. Here, again, multiple photos, are shown to a witness in groups or in sequence. Okay. And many departments, again, use that 6-pack photo display of mugshots or other photos. And the officers are going to read the victim or witness an admonishment as well. And the reason for that, again, is to make sure there's no pressure on the victim. Now, just for sake of you learning, there's two types of photo lineups or live lineups. There's what they call a standard, which is the 6-pack, like I showed you, or what they call sequential. That means you show one photo at a time to the witness or the victim in sequence. And I'll show you exactly what that looks like, but I just wanted you to know that there's two types, okay? Let's see here. Here's the photo lineup form that I talked about, the admonishment. So the officer's going to fill in the information up here, viewed by the date and time, the location, the lineup, who put the lineup together, or who did the person, get the lineup from, the type of photographs, hard copy, digital, etc., the name of the individuals, and if there's a CDL or a booking number, they put it here, and the admonishment. The suspect may or may not be among the pictures depicted in the photos. You're under no obligation to identify anyone. However, should you recognize or note any similarities between the suspect and any of the subjects in the photos, please let me know. And then you can write, and you can put the comments. The person did ID him, didn't ID him. Some departments have you circle, initial, etc. So this is what a 6-pack might look like. Okay? They don't look identical, but they're pretty close, right? I mean, in the grand scheme of kind of things. What you don't want to do is have 5, black and white photos and 1 color photo, because the color photo stands out, right? So you want to at least, if your suspect is in a black and white photo, then you want to get black and white photos. If it's a color photo, you want to get color photos. But you just want to have kind of the same sort of hairstyle. You don't have to worry about height too much or weight too much, really, because you're just getting the upper part of the photo. Here's what a sequential photo lineup looks like. You would read the same admonishment, but you would do this. You would show your victim 1 photo. They would say yes or no. You're going to go through all the photos, no matter what. Even if they say the second photo is the guy, you still go through them all. But you do them one at a time. Just like that. So you'll hand them 1 picture at a time, and they'll view 1 at a time. The rationale is that a sequential lineup is, this probably isn't the greatest English, but it's more fair or objective than showing a victim or a witness all the pictures at the same time. Because typically what happens is, if I show you all the photos at the same time, if you're not sure, you gravitate just basically towards the person that you think might look the most, and you're not really doing an actual ID. If you really can ID somebody, you should be able to do them 1 at a time and go, yep, that's him. If that kind of makes sense. So a lot of agencies are switching to sequential, but a lot of them still use the standard. So just note that there's 2 types, that's all. And then a lineup, that's where you have a group of individuals from 5 to 9, number-wise, all at the same time, or you can do a live lineup sequential, the same way you did, with the photos. You would have 1 person come into the room, turn around, face the, do whatever, and then leave. And so you could do a sequential live lineup or standard, okay? So a live lineup, is ID commonly used when a suspect is in custody, okay? And there were witnesses to the crime. At its most basic level, a police lineup involves placing a suspect among people not suspected of committing the crime. Again, typically 6 to 10. It depends on jurisdiction. And you can also do sequential. So the standard is they all come in at the same time and stand shoulder to shoulder. Sequential would be 1 at a time, just like with your photo lineup, okay? Again, whether it's a photo lineup or a live lineup, suspects need to be similar, okay? Not of a different race, exceptionally taller or shorter. You can't have 5 people that are, 6'4", 220, and then your suspect is 5'2", 140. That won't make it, right? Because it's too much of a difference. It's too obvious, okay? So you try to get them the same, okay? Just so like when you kind of look at, here, yeah, okay, you've got some shorter individuals, but they're all male, but you can't like throw in, all male and one female or something like that. So again, you just want to try to make it as similar as you can. All right. So that was pretty